Welcome to the Art School Podcast. I'm Ken Goshen. Today I'm speaking with Josh Clare. Josh is a fantastic painter and the first art school guest focused on landscape work. So lots of valuable insight here for all you plein airsters. Josh is the recipient of numerous awards, including Artist Choice at the 2012 Laguna Plein Air Invitational and second place in the Rainmar 6th Annual Painting Competition. In 2014, Josh was featured for 3 consecutive months in several of the nation's finest art magazines: Western Art and Architecture, Southwest Art, and Art of the West. This conversation was super fun and informative, so I'm sure you'll greatly enjoy it. This podcast is brought to you by the generosity of my Patreon supporters, and especially my top supporter, Rick. I am on a mission to make extremely affordable, high-quality art education available to anyone who seeks it. And if you feel like this is a cause worth supporting, you can do that at patreon.com/Ken Goshen. By pledging just $2 of support, you'll be invited to 6 upcoming live painting demos. That's less than 20 cents per live painting hour. Not to mention all the video content that's also available for that same $2. The only way I can continue offering all of this at such infinitesimal cost is if many more of you decide to become $2 Patreon supporters and make it sustainable. You can do that at patreon.com/Ken Goshen. And my sincere gratitude to those of you who've already joined. And now I bring you my conversation with Josh Clare. Josh, thank you so much for taking the time for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
So I'm super excited to have you here because I'm a really big fan of your work. As we said just a moment ago before we started the recording, I'm a huge fan of that portrait back there, and we're gonna get to talking about those. But first, maybe bring us into what made you decide that you wanted to be an artist?
It was always part of me. And you don't really see it clearly until later. So I think art was almost a non-option. Honestly, I just had to do it, something in the arts, So it might've been, well, it was probably college. So I didn't have any real art training through high school. And when I went to college, I served a mission in Japan. And so my whole focus was on like 2 years that was going to be spent in Japan. And I had like a semester of college before my mission. And it felt, like a throwaway semester, or just like I could do whatever I want that semester. So I declared art as my major, kind of on I don't know, all the career tests said do it. So I was like, okay, I might as well, major in art. So anyway, but that semester I had so much fun and had so much joy in creating, so that when I came back from my mission 2 years later, it was, I knew that I had to find something in the arts to do.
Just to make sure that I understand, what kind of mission are we talking about? Just so that I'm up to speed.
So a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So a missionary. Yeah. So I learned Japanese and I taught about Jesus Christ for 2 years in Japan.
Oh my God. And you were painting while you were up to doing that?
No, I hadn't even painted at that point, actually. I didn't paint until college. And so I came home and took my first painting class like a year after that.
Wow, that's amazing. And would you say that the time that you spent in Japan had any kind of influence on your artistic output later? Like that kind of the aesthetic? Yeah, exactly. Japanese aesthetic, because it's very different from what we were used to getting here in America.
It is, yeah. And I think so. I think my love of clean, simple design came from the gardens that I walked through and the architecture and just the way that their art, generally is, and the way that they think. I loved it though. It's a very, very beautiful place and beautiful people.
Wow, I've never been, but it's definitely on my to-do list. I love how you describe it. It is indeed about simplicity, clean design, simple lines, and this is really something that's totally evident in your work. So it's really, really interesting to hear that connection. When you started painting, who would you say were like your most influential teachers, whether it's like people who are living or people people that you just kind of looked at their work and tried to emulate?
Right. So at school, I went to BYU, Idaho, and Leon Parson was the head of the department there. And just, I feel like everything that I know about painting came from Leon, just all the beautiful fundamentals, all those truths that, 10 years later, I'll be painting and think, oh yeah, Leon was trying to teach me this 10 years ago, like,
wow.
He said this over and over and over, and I understood it then, but it makes more sense the longer I paint. So yeah, Leon was key. And there were a lot of actually really great teachers there. It was a really, really good art school back in those days. And I just got super lucky my graphic design teacher, Scott Franson, was fantastic. And illustration, Wade Huntsman and Gerald Griffin and Scott, just all of the art classes were fantastic. Watercolor, everything was cool.
Wow. Okay. That is a very unusual answer in today's landscape, because from the majority of people that I speak with, and even from my personal experience, a lot of today's art academies, art schools, art universities are not totally focused in instilling the kind of principles that you bring to bear in your work. So would you say that art school is different from other art schools, and if so, what do you think is the reason for that?
Very different. Yeah, it was super unique, especially at the time, right? I graduated in 2007. So it's become more common for an atelier or even a university to offer more traditional art courses. But it was highly unusual back then. And yeah, so, and the funny thing is, it's not an art school at all. It's just a traditional university. It had been just a 2-year university, and had like when I attended before my mission, it was 2-year. When I returned, they had changed things and they'd been accredited to become a 4-year university. So small, and it's a church-sponsored university, right? It's like it's out of the way. That's part of it. I think it may have been more traditional because of the traditional religious influence on the school. But kind of as an interesting side note, things have changed up there too. Like Leon has moved on. Most of the instructors have moved on or retired. And so their program has become a little bit more like the rest of the programs across the country, right? Definitely weaker in my opinion.
That is unfortunate to hear, but I'm fascinated by the way that this is probably, it makes a lot of sense that this would be connected to the traditional view of religious institutions, because the relationship between church and art is it's long standing, and right. I totally could understand that if the institution was in some way supported by religious institutions, they would have more of an appreciation to the kind of classical way of creating visual arts, as opposed to I don't want to be derogatory in any way, but making a performance art piece where we go scantily clothed and outside and promoting some kind of cause. So did you feel throughout your studies this kind of connection to an older way of looking at visual arts? Because when I was at Parsons, painting of the kind that you and I make seemed to need a whole lot of justification for just engaging in, because it seemed so passé and so on,
right.
Like non-contemporary. Did you have a totally different experience?
It was like the Garden of Eden. It was fantastic. And I think the philosophy of Leon, the department head, and it trickled down to everybody else, was this isn't a place to indoctrinate kids about what art should be, or to try to focus on the theory of art or ideas about art. We talked about that. We had plenty of art theory classes and stuff like that, but it was not the focus. His idea, which I think is extremely sound, beautiful idea is let's just teach them how to paint, and then they can worry about why they paint and what they paint and all that stuff later. I think that's where almost every other institution goes wrong, is they focus almost solely on what we should be painting and the ideas we should be expressing and all of that stuff, when they should just be teaching people how to paint. Like, it's a gross, it's a crime really to fail to teach people how to make stuff and to focus on why they should make stuff, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like teaching a writing class and saying, we're not going to talk at all about any logistics of writing. We're just going to talk about ideas. Like, what? What about the craft? What about the craft of writing? What the flip, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know why we do pretty well in almost every other artistic discipline. We have to teach people to play instruments before we talk about what they're going to play, right? But in art, we feel like, oh, we can skip that. Who cares?
Yeah.
We're not going to teach you how to make stuff. We'll just teach you why to make stuff. And anyway, fascinating. So I just lucked out, really, really lucked out. I went to a very special place where they taught me how to make things. And then they said, it was implied. They didn't even talk about it. It was like, go figure out what to make and why you want to make it later. But here's how to make a painting,
So for everybody who's been listening to this podcast for a while, they know that I'm 100% on your side. And I love the way that you say it. And I love even more the opportunity that I have right now to play devil's advocate, because it seems like you're a great representative of this position that I hold. But for the sake of argument, I'm gonna try something. So what if we give them grace, these academies, and we come from this point of view and we say, listen, when you look at the most successful artists alive today, none of them can paint, none of them can draw, none of them can sculpt. They're all employing vast networks of craftsmen, and everything that's really important and everything in their work that has led to their massive success was their ideas. It was their ability to articulate these ideas. It was their abilities to contextualize their work within a contemporary environment. So
right.
if that's what we see at the top of the art field, wouldn't it be irresponsible for these academies to focus on teaching their students craftsmanship?
The craftsmanship, right? And I guess it all hinges upon your definition of success, right? They're massively successful in terms of they make a lot of money, like a lot of money. And I don't know, would you even say in terms of popularity or famous, that they're famous? Like, people in the right circle know them. I actually don't know really who's at the top of the modern art heap right now. I don't really know. I don't follow it. And I'm a professional artist, right? So, but they're famous. There's a certain degree of, there's fame that comes with that. So money, fame, and that would be, what else would you include in that? That's about it, huh? That's their success.
I would say, something, I agree with you that this is really about a definition of success. So I'm going to insert something that I totally value as a definition of success, which is they show in the big museums, which is right. Something I would cool. want that.
That's a good point. So they're accepted by like the large institutions and the people who have lots of power. So maybe that's it. Like, so lots of money, fame, and power, a certain amount of power, because they're recognized as by the large institutions or the people who have the say as this is a guy that matters. But yeah, I guess my argument against that would be, for me, success is something totally different. I do want, the only thing that I want, I mean, those are all nice, right? Money, fame, and power, that's good stuff. I wouldn't mind some of that myself, but especially the recognition for an artist, like the validation of a museum purchasing a work and saying this is important to art, right? Like, that's something that I think all artists crave. But apart from those three things, the thing that matters more than anything to me is making a thing that matters just by itself, apart from me and apart from what the institutions say is valuable and apart from how much people pay for it, apart from everything. I want to make a thing that is meaningful, very deeply, inherently meaningful, and that matters now and that matters for a really long time. So like a novel, a timeless novel, a classic, right? That would be the equivalent in literature, not just like a fatty self-help book that like sells 20 million copies and then everyone tires of very quickly and is easily forgotten. Like something that is eternal, not eternal, but like that lasts and that matters to all kinds of different people in different generations. Like that's successful to me. Something like that. That's what I want to make. So that would be my argument to these institutions is like, if you're focused on creating an artist that gets those first things, like a lot of money and a lot of popularity and a lot of power, then continue doing what you're doing, because that's what your curriculum is designed to produce. But if you want to create artists that make those pieces, right? There's not a lot of, you go to museums and there's a lot of fantastic work, but there's just a select few. There's a couple that change you, right? That are transforming pieces of art. They're just paintings. It's just mud on a canvas, but they're so powerful, so like otherworldly, so magical almost. So if you want to create artists, if you want to help artists get to that point, then you've got to teach them about their craft. You've got to.
So what do you think makes an artwork, a classic, a timeless object, something that has inherent meaning?
Its effect on the viewer, I would say. And I would classify it, if you're going to do a scientific study on what's the most classic artworks, like what, and the effect, I would say, for a classic has to build, in my opinion, like it's got to lift a little bit. It can't just, I don't think a classic would be an artwork that depresses or that demoralizes or that makes you feel like that's just based solely on debunking the current tradition of art, right? Like the urinal hanging on the wall or the can of poop or whatever like that. That kind of stuff doesn't lift the viewer. And if you're going to do a scientific study on art and what's the most enduring and the classic and the best art, I would take a sample of all kinds of different people from all kinds of socioeconomic situations, and I'd stick them in front of a painting and I'd say, how did that painting make you feel? And most of modern art right now that's extremely highly valued and right, that's at the top of the modern art heap, I think most of the people that looked at that piece, especially people who haven't been instructed as to what current art should be, right? I think most of the people that looked at that would just feel confused and they'd feel dumb. They'd feel like, I think I'm supposed to like it. I think I'm probably supposed to feel something, but I don't get it, right? And so in my opinion, it fails miserably as a thing that communicates. And if it does communicate, it's usually because of the huge art statement on to the right of the painting, right? And you see the people at the museum with their face in that sucker. Like, there's the painting. Like, you said, holy cow, look at the flipping painting. Or they've got their earbuds on and they're trying to they're not even looking at it. They're just like trying to listen to some other educated person tell them why it's amazing. So it fails. For me, it fails. Like, music communicates without us trying to explain what it means. And books communicate without us having like an additional, oh, this is what it should actually mean to you. So why the heck is a painting entered this new constellation where it's just whatever, and then you have to read the artist statement to figure out what it's supposed to make you feel like, or what the heck they're trying to accomplish. So the classics, the endurings, the ones that work are the ones that you stick 100 people from a million different backgrounds in front of, and they all go, wow. Right? And it changes them. It matters to them. It communicates to them. It works. Like, that's a classic to me.
I love that. I'm gonna continue mildly playing devil's advocate because I think it's interesting for the viewers and for the listeners. So
Right.
when you say lift, when you say the word lift and artwork has to lift us, you
Mm.
wouldn't dispute the fact that there are many classic paintings who are pretty depressive, you know, like just for
Right.
example, like Jericho's Raft of Medusa. Okay, we're thinking about
Mm.
paintings
Right.
about tragedy and death, or Goya's black paintings, these kinds of classics that you go to, you see them, and then you come out feeling pretty down on yourself. Would you say that these works
Mm.
still have the ability to lift us in a perhaps not so self-evident way?
Right. I hope so. Kind of similar to Tolstoy's work, to the Russians, right?
Mm,
A lot of the Russian classics are a little bit of downers, like in the actual novel themselves, but there are parts in there that make you feel like there's more, like the character could be redeemed, like something could change, and it ends with you not wanting to go out and kill yourself. At least I don't want to kill myself after reading those. I feel like, okay, they made the, like, I participated in a bunch of mistakes with the protagonist, and I want to do better myself, right? And so some of those, the Raft of Medusa and stuff like that, some of those paintings, they're commentaries on the hard that is in life. Like, that's fine. That's okay to talk about that. But there's a way to paint it um, that can help a person want more, that can help a person go, yuck, like, let's try to lift humanity out of this situation. And there's a way to paint it that just goes, life sucks, this is the worst, it's all over. You know what I mean? And so I think that's the difference. I would say it's not
mm.
that you can't paint dark paint. It's not that that's banned. Like, you can't talk about hard things. It's just that I think the art has a responsibility
Mm.
to maybe point to, like, a better way to say something about hard stuff that gives you, like, a little bit of hope as well somehow.
I love that so much. And I think to me there's a beauty in painting something tragic because it has an inherent contradiction in it. You tell me what you think. So essentially,
Mm.
if we look at Jericho's Raft of Medusa, what we have is like an enormous painting, like 3 meters high or something like that, and
Mm.
it's depicting in it in the most grand sense the tragedy of being alive. And
Mm.
there's a conflict here because if being alive is so tragic, why are you spending all this time painting this enormous composition 3 meters high? Like, everything in this painting is telling us that despair is warranted, but everything about the way that this painting was created tells us that there is still something to cling to, like life is still
Mm.
worth living, because the proof of that is the existence of the painting. And
Mm.
that's the kind of way out that is not provided for us in Duchamp's work, despite the fact that I slightly appreciate Duchamp, but that's a different conversation. But in this
Right.
ready-made tradition, or the contemporary art tradition, where it's, you know, it's easy to illuminate the cynical and the painful and the dreadful,
Right.
but where's the contrast? You know, art is about contrast for me, like light versus dark, textured versus smooth. So also like tragic
Mm.
subject matter versus like evident ambition and hope that is required in order to produce an enormous scale of work. So to me,
Right.
that almost touches on the kind of philosophy of Edmund Burke when he talks about the sublime. When he talks about the sublime, he says, in order to really be elevated, you have to be a little scared. You have to be
Mm.
aware of your mortality. Once a person is aware that life doesn't last forever and that we have a limited time to live, this fear evokes in us a desire to want to make the most out of life. Right. So
Mm.
there's some
Yeah.
ability to take the terrible and convert it through art or through how would you say, articulate expression of any means,
Right.
and turn it into something that makes you want to say, okay, I gotta live a better life now, having seen this terrible painting. I want to live a better life. There's something about contemporary art that is so cynical that when you look at it, you say, I don't want to go to a museum again. I just feel alienated. You know what I mean?
Life's the worst. Yeah. That's how, yeah, exactly. And I love that thought. That's a really beautiful thought, that part part of the hope that might be in that painting was just from the artists like the amazing amount of work and craftsmanship that he put into this thing that mattered to him, right? I love that, that's part of the redeeming quality of it. And that Duchamp's urinal, like he didn't do anything, right? He hardly even thought about it. It just, so there's none of that even to redeem it. It's a very depressing idea,
right?
A real downer. And then there's nothing about it that lets you just go away going, oh man.
Oh, so there's no art, nor is there points to art
Nothing matters.
Nothing matters. Exactly. And it's like, I don't even think that it ends with him making that painting and that painting mattered to him. That painting mattered to him despite the fact that he knew of all the dread, like all the dread that exists in the painting must have existed in his mind for him to be able to put it on the canvas. And despite the fact that he knew it and felt it so profoundly, he still did it. He still got up in the morning and put those strokes onto the canvas for years, you know?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's cool. It's a good thought. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you again, I'm going to be a little provocative. So we were talking about the responses that people get when they are confronted with the work. On the one hand, you know, they're in front of some kind of masterpiece. They're in front of a Botticelli. Everybody swoons. Everybody loves it. And then they're in front of Duchamp. People get a little confused. Or in front of Cy Twombly, people get a little confused, or more than a little confused. But also, people like, perhaps you less so, but people of our ilk, sometimes when we put up paintings in the gallery, we get something like, I don't get the message here. Why wouldn't he just take a photograph of this forest or this? Like, why would anybody spend time doing any of that? Like, this has no message. I have nothing to go home with. This is just a tree. Why is that wrong? Why don't they deserve a deeper political message as opposed to getting images that they have, you know, their phone can make these images, quote unquote.
Right. Well, and so that brings, I'm glad you went there, because like the saying that art should instruct or that art should edify is an interesting, there's kind of a delicate line, and I have pretty strong opinions about everything actually, but about this as well. So there's a difference between a real work of art, like, and let's go back to literature. Edification is something, it's a word that I really like, and I think that art should edify, and it's what we've been talking about. Doesn't mean it has to be happy all the time. It means it has to, like, even if it's extremely subtly, it has to, the best art makes you hope a little bit, or want to be a little bit better, or try a little harder, live better, love more, right? But how does it go about that then, right? And so if we go to literature, you could write a huge, long, nasty, boring essay on how to be a better person, and nobody is going to ever want to read it. Or you could write a really subtle allegory, or you could write a poem that's like just hints, just subtle little whispers that allows the viewer to participate more, right? And it's the difference between sitting in a class and being lectured at, and how you feel when you read a really, really beautiful poem. And it's so subtle, and the ideas are so delicately stated, so carefully stated, so hinted at, that as a reader of the best poetry, you feel like you came up with the poem yourself. Mm-hmm. You feel almost that moment of creative, you feel like you were the one who thought of that amazing metaphor, and it means so much to you because you do it. And I think art, the greatest art, is the same, that in instructing and in edifying, if a painting gives you everything, it becomes an essay. And really, really, really boring, right? Like, I don't like to look at essay paintings. Like when every little hair, every little peach fuzz, and it's everywhere from corner to corner, it's all there. There's no room for me as the viewer. There's just nothing, right? So I just don't have time for paintings like that. So I adore, I'm drawn to, and I love suggestion in painting. I love subtlety. I love leaving as much out as you possibly can, like only saying as much as is absolutely necessary. I love pushing towards poetry, but it's still got to edify. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it can't be, because you could argue that the urinal, I keep going back to the urinal or the can of poop, that's very metaphorical, allegorical, that's very subtle, and that there's so much meaning deep in there. But I don't think so. It's a wide spectrum. You've got that on this side, and then you've got super tight, like religious, like this is exactly what's happening, and you should learn this from this paintings. And there's this happy place in the middle where there's poetry and painting.
Wow, there's so many threads that I want to pull on, especially the stab at hyperrealism. But first, perhaps because we should, and we should, and we're going to. But first, because we aim to educate, perhaps, to the people who go to museums or who go to galleries and are confronted with, let's say, naturalistic painting of the kind that you and I appreciate, and they still think, I don't get it. Like, this looks to me like a photo. How do we explain to them where the poetry lies? What would you suggest that if they could take 10 minutes to look at a painting, how could we bring them in to the world that we inhabit so that they can derive as much pleasure from these images as you and I do?
And I think the answer to that is that there's not a quick way. And that's kind of that's the beauty about art, right? It's similar to pop music and to classical music. Play a pop song, like a really catchy pop song, to any human of any age, and they'll go, oh, I could get into that, right? And play classical, extremely complex, beautiful classical music to them, and there's not going to be as many that go, yeah. There's going to be a lot of well, it's nice, but I'm just not quite, I don't quite get it. It just takes time, it takes exposure, it takes education, right? And so being an art appreciator, like a person who consumes art, I guess, is it's a thing of the past, but I'm hoping that it comes back. And that's going to take a lot of education. In the past, that's what they had. That was their movie, right? So everybody went to the shows, everybody went to the museums, and they learned. You have to learn what it takes to make a painting. That's why you and I can go to a museum and just be so lifted by the stuff, because we can be this close to it and just enjoying a subtle glaze. Like a teeny little passage of paint can make our day, right? Like, but if you've never looked at a painting and you just have no clue as to what it takes to make something like that, it can be much more daunting or incomprehensible, and they can be like, I don't get it. I mean, it just looks like a painting. So if I was with someone like that in a museum and I had 10 minutes, I'd begin to explain about color and value and design, and I try to tell them, like, this is what makes this so masterful and beautiful to me. But as far as them really appreciating it, they would have to get on that train and take that journey. Like, and it's a joyous journey, though. It's the same type of journey that we take as the artists, as we learn to see the world. Because when I first looked out my window at the mountains and the sunset, I was like, yeah, that's beautiful, right? And 15 years later, it's so much more beautiful to me, because I see so much more clearly. And I anticipate that in 15 years, it's going to be 15 years more beautiful to me. There's still a lot that I don't see. And so you basically would have to just take that person, stand them in front of the painting, and say, listen, you're at the very bottom of a very tall ladder. And it's a beautiful ladder to climb. And there's so much joy to be had as you learn to see. But if you want to really appreciate, if you want to really understand this, like, it's going to take a lot of looking and a lot of time. You're going to have to be committed to it. But it's an addicting journey too. So it's not like it's work. It's not like you have to go it's fun, but it's a journey, I guess.
I love that. I want to add my 2 cents on it. There's something that I sometimes say to people, which helps them come over to our side a little bit, and it's actually trying to explain to people that it's not that the photograph that we're all used to seeing life through the lens of photography. Everything we get is we get it through screens, we get it through posters. So we're used to seeing life as if a photograph is a loyal and faithful representation of what's in front of us. But in fact, it's very, very far from it. Very, very far from it. And the best example that I can give is we all kind of had this experience once or twice where we want to take a picture of our friend with the sunset behind him, and what's going on in our field of vision is so beautiful and so magical. And then you try to take the photo, and what you get is a silhouette. You get a silhouette, and you're very frustrated, and you think, wait, what? Like, that's nothing like what I'm seeing. And so there is this misconception that the camera is a faithful representation of what we see. But in fact, when you go down this journey, you understand what we see, aka life, is way too rich for anything, any technology, any painter, anybody to capture all the stuff that's there in all of its richness and all of its complexity. So decisions have to be made. Editing has to be made. Editing is done by the camera, regardless of whether or not people are aware of it or not. And it's like, I'm citing the silhouette example. In real life, you don't see your friend as a shadow. You see their facial features and all the beautiful colors in there, but the camera can't capture it. The camera has limitations, and the camera imposes a kind of arbitrary aesthetic onto life. And the aesthetic that we bring to bear onto life when we paint from life is a completely different aesthetic, and one that represents our own decisions with regards to what we think we want to take out of life, what we think are the most important things to put in. And if we were to paint that friend in front of the sunset, we can pretty much guarantee that that silhouette will be less disappointing, because we have our priorities, our human priorities, which are very different from a mechanical priority of a photograph. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, it's a great example. I love it.
So maybe this could lead us naturally into the infamous discussion around painting from photography. What's your take on it?
So I use photography a lot, but I never just use it as is, because it's never good enough, like you said. So as I've painted from life and learned to see more clearly, it's my memory has expanded, my visual memory, and like I become increasingly better able to take a bad photograph and fix it, right? And as many editing applications and all the software and all the technology that we have to change a photograph and make it better, it still doesn't, a photograph still never, as much as I change it and much as I fix it, it's still never going to be as rich, like you said, as the actual thing. But it affords an artist an opportunity, I think, to paint from memory a little bit more, to like use what they've experienced outside. And so my take on photography and painting from life is that it's a fantastic tool. It's a wonderful tool, and it can really help, but it can never replace the amazing, amazing education that you see from studying nature directly. And so that's an absolute essential. It's something that should never be compromised, something that an artist should treat himself to, because it's a treat, right? It's so amazing, and nothing can teach you about beauty like nature, like the source of beauty. So yeah, I use photographs a lot, but it's just a lot of changing. I just never, and do you know, there's an interesting, I have this kind of, I'm surprised at it in myself, honestly, is that you would think that, because painting from nature, painting from life is daunting. There's so much, like you said, there has to be so much editing and so much simplifying, that when you go out for the first time and sit in front of a blank canvas with your landscape, I mean, it's almost, it's painful. It's very painful. you realize really clearly just how little you are and how little you know. But as I've done it more and more, I have this really strange kind of paradox right now where I have a huge amount of confidence painting from life. And it's not because I'm awesome or because like I can paint everything. I have so much to learn and so far to go in my ability to see, comprehend beauty and put it on my canvas. But that confidence comes from the connection of me to nature. Like I see the color and I see the value the way that it is. And I have this sense of like, well, there it is. I can paint it because I can see it. You know what I mean? And it's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. Even if I do a stinker of a painting, like I have this sense of, well, it's just right there. All I got to do is just, like get that value and it'll look that beautiful. When I paint from photos, I don't have that and I miss it a lot. And when I paint from a photo, I have this sense of, I know that it's not right. That value can't be right. It's a little bit darker, probably a little lighter, probably a little brown. Like, I just have this like sense of, maybe it's like this. And it's a lot of me working from memory, a lot of me working from just how I feel, what feels right and what doesn't feel right. But anyway, so photographs are great and stuff, but I don't, at least for myself, I can't trust them. And so there's this sense of uncertainty and of kind of like timidity and fear when I work solely from photographs. And then sense of confidence and truth and like it's all good when I work from life. So anyway.
I relate so full-heartedly, and I mean, actually, no, with one caveat, I don't like painting from photographs. So whenever I can avoid it, I do. But I think this leads us to our casual and minor segue into stabbing at hyperrealism. I think that's to me what they do wrong. I mean, they follow photographs so closely that to me, it doesn't look like life anymore. It really doesn't look anything like life. When we see a photorealistic painting of like a motorcycle, which is something we see a lot, and then in the metallic chrome, you see the reflection of all the street and the reflection of this, the people walking around and the sidewalk and all that stuff. Is when we look at life and we look at a beautiful motorcycle, that's not what makes the motorcycle beautiful. That's not what makes the motorcycle beautiful. And what comes to mind when I see that is something similar to comparing the experience of looking at the moon and being just completely dazzled by the beauty of the moon. Compare that to a scan that NASA makes of the moon, where you see all the craters like super clearly. When you see that kind of thing, it just becomes like a crime scene or a document. Here are all the craters on the moon. But what is the where is the real beauty of the moon? It's very difficult to ascertain where beauty lies. Because when we look at the moon, it looks very, very different from the scan. When we look at the beautiful motorcycle, it looks very different from the hyperrealist representation of the motorcycle. So I think the most important thing that I could tell people who paint from photographs is to ask themselves this very difficult question, like, where does the beauty lie, right? The beauty doesn't lie in the object. The beauty is not in the moon. The beauty is not in the motorcycle. The beauty is elsewhere, because this same object could be represented through various different medias and appear beautiful here and totally a total bummer in another representation of the same object. So when we understand that the beauty is not even in the mountain, the beauty is not even in the cloud. So I that's where I take slight issue with saying that the beauty is in nature. I think the beauty is nowhere in those objects per se, but rather, and I think you put it beautifully, the way that we relate to them. You in front of nature creates beauty because of your attention span, because you can look at that mountain through the prism that is sensitive to beauty, right? It's almost like when you first start out playing music and your senses become sharper and sharper, and then suddenly you can hear the instruments separately in a track. It's like, oh, this is what the bass does. Oh, this is what the piano does, where most people are not sensitive to that. And you could tell them, oh, here's what I love about this song. Like, check out what the bass does right here. And they're like, I don't understand what you're talking to me about. So essentially there's beauty. I think beauty is almost always a function of attention, a function of somebody being present at some point and seeing some kind of relationship that when brought together produces beauty.
Right. That's, I like that thought a lot. I do think that beauty is still in those things, but that it doesn't happen. It doesn't matter until it's received. It's like, a gift that is given and never opened it never becomes a gift, right? Even though all the pieces are there, someone's just got to pick it up. So I think that's similar. Yeah, I think that's similar to beauty. Like, it's there. It's just waiting for us to receive it.
So when you're describing a scenario where you would be out there in the landscape, completely overwhelmed by the beauty of nature and having a lot of fun. That's something that I totally relate to. And then we all know that if you took a photo of that same mountain, took it to the studio, it would be a completely different experience. Doesn't contain all the majesty of nature. And you have a lot of memory and experience painting from life. But to those of us who don't, are there any bits of advice that you could give them? People who are, mostly painting from photographs, can't go out into the landscape. Maybe they live in New York, they want to paint a mountain, but they're my neighbors, right? So what is there anything that you can kind of advise them when they really have this passion for painting things that are not around them, and they want to make those photographs more painterly or use them as references in a less banal way? How could we guide them?
I'm glad you said that, because I think it's important. Like, you said you don't enjoy painting from photos, and I don't enjoy painting from photos. Because there's not that, like you're saying, there's not that connection. There's not that amazing inspiration or that truth. But a photo can be extremely helpful to help me get to the place where I want to go, right? Because in the amount of time that I have, especially in landscape, it is so fleeting, right? And it's like, no moment ever remains, ever. Like, it happens and it's gone for eternity. And so there's a billion, like, uncountable moments of beauty that are out there waiting for me to receive. So when I have that experience and I do that little sketch from life, no matter how good the sketch is, it captures a bit of my enthusiasm. It captures a bit of my experience with beauty, and it's important. And so those sketches, I think, are beautiful and matter to me. But I have this craving to go further. There's so much that I saw, right? And I can't do it there in that little sketch. So I need more. And that's what the studio is to me. Like, I have to go process. I have to go just try to make something that more fully communicates the amazing experience that I just had. And so any tool that I can use to help me get there is definitely worth checking out, right? And the camera is a definite, you have a phone and you go, it's that easy to take a picture, to have something that might help me later on in the studio. So the way that I use photography in the studio is to help me with details, basically. I can't trust it for color. I can't trust it for value, but I can trust it to take every crack of every crater in the moon, right? Like, all that stuff that might help me later on, little teeny details. I'm not going to add them all, because I'm only going to add, only as much as is absolutely necessary, right? I'm going to take away as much as I can possibly take away. But I've got a billion details in the photo just in case, right? So that's what a photo does for me. And when I paint from a photo in the studio, it's small on my computer, and I don't zoom in and start to noodle, write an essay about the photo, I paint the same way that I paint from life. So that would be my recommendation, my advice on painting from photos is make them small. You can't manufacture the same kind of urgency that's just there because the sun goes wonk, right? Like it just there's an amazing sense of urgency and excitement from life that you can't recreate when you're painting from a photo, but you have to try. So you have to give yourself a time limit. You have to just try to go fast, or else you're going to get into the lie that is a photo, right? You'll be seduced by the lie that is a photo, and you'll get in and start doing this, and you'll make something that is a step away from truth, right? With this big photo as a barrier between you and reality, and the painting will suffer because of it. So paint quickly. You just can't trust the photo. I turn them black and white sometimes.
Wow.
So that I'm not seduced by color and incorrect values. Anyway, so that's a bit of the other thing I would say to someone who's in New York, say, and they want to paint mountains desperately, is don't paint mountains. You don't know enough about mountains to paint mountains. If you want to move mountains, then move to Colorado or Utah and look at mountains and paint mountains and tell us truth about mountains that you learn as you look at them, right? Like that's a bad choice. If you live in New York, New York's beautiful. Like I want to paint New York. Every time I go to New York, I've done a couple paintings, cityscapes of like when I've gone there and I've walked the streets and I've just been blown away by the color and the people everywhere and the gorgeousness of it. If I lived in New York, I'd paint New York all the time. It's gorgeous. Just look out your window, paint it. Or you don't even have to look out your window. Just sit in your living room and paint the way the sunlight hits the wall. It's fantastic. Like
I love it.
It's like a dream come true. Reality is a dream come true. So don't, you don't have to ever paint from photos. And even if you like have a living that relies upon you painting mountains and you live in New York, you should still spend an hour, 2 hours every day painting out your window so that you can learn about true light and true color and true value.
Amazing. Well, first of all, if you ever come to paint New York, you should hit me up. I'll join you. I'll be very excited to do that with you.
I love it. It's so good.
And my question to you is, and I recognize that this is a difficult one. You say you look at the photo and you try not to get seduced, and you assume that the colors and the values are wrong. Your colors and your values are spectacular. Where do they come from? How do you, we all assume, okay, we're not going to be seduced. We're not going to take the photograph for granted. How do you come up with your colors and your values and make them look so delicious?
So I'll just take you in here and I'll show you. I'll give you like I'll show you my little wall of sketches. Does this thing turn? A second. There you go. These are...
Oh, goodness me. To those of us just listening, I'm going to try to describe what I'm seeing. It looks like hundreds of tiny little sketches the size of maybe a postcard or less. And they are oh my goodness, there are so many of them. Okay, this just means that this is an episode that I have to put on YouTube. Okay, so
yes,
unbelievable.
And that's a really small sampling of them. But that's what I do from life. And this changes and I change the longer I paint and the longer I am alive. But my process to this point has been to take notes from life, color and value notes. I find that finishing from life in a landscape is very, it's insane, actually. And what turns out happening is that you spend 2 hours, 3 hours in your painting, and occasionally you glance up because you're so busy. Because you've got so much to do, right? Like this is a huge thing. And I teach workshops all the time, and people are in there just for hours in here. And I'm like, what are you doing? like, why are you outside if you're going to do that? You know, you can do that in the studio, not looking at anything. So I found that one of the most effective ways to capture value in color outside is to work very, very small, very, very quickly.
So if I could package that as a sentence, one sentence advice, and correct me if I'm wrong, you would suggest making quick, small sketches from life and then not selling them, keeping them in the studio so that later you can say, oh man, this photograph's a total bummer, but hey, I got this other sketch that has really nice colors and really nice conclusions. I can actually import, I can take knowledge. Yeah, I can pull from these sketches that I've done on the spot and use those conclusions in my more finished work. Would that be accurate?
Yes, yes. And so that's what I was talking about, where you turn the photo black and white, you take your little sketch from life, and that's what you use to create the studio piece. But that's, like, as a full confession, it's still difficult. It's still been difficult. And many times I've had my photo and I've had my little sketch from life and I've had my painting, and I end up like chasing the photo more than I chase my sketch, right? Like, it's a hard thing to do. So I feel like, I keep trying to like create the energy and the joy and the unity that happens in that little piece on a large scale, in a more finished, in a more, and a lot, my studio work is a lot of this, is like pushing towards, like a more refined, a more complex statement, I guess, because nature is so complex. I'm trying to find ways in my studio work to rejoice in that amazing infinite variety in nature, that amazing complexity. And I'm still trying to figure it out. For me, that's like what my artistic journey is about, because I could spend my whole life doing sketches from life. I could sell them. I could make a living. It would be very happy for me. I love doing that. But like, I crave something more. I want it so bad. I found it in like Emil Carlson, for example, in a surface that's variety is so intense that it seems to rival nature, right? But when I'm in front of it in the museum, I'm just like, I get the same sort of high that I get experiencing that painting as I get from experiencing reality, which is insane that can happen. But anyway, I want that. And so that's why I come into the studio. And that's why I'm going through this battle and the struggle of trying to figure it out. But I guess the one thing I was going to say about the sketches too is even if it is hard, and it truly is, to trust your sketch more than it is to trust the photo that you take, what I've gained from thousands and thousands of teeny little sketches from life is like an imprint. In the process of making that thing, I think it's changing me. It's changing my brain, so that when I actually go to paint a photo, I make choices now that are based upon sort of almost a subconscious thing that happens in creating all those thousands of studies from life. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Oh, totally. It makes total sense. And I'm also happy that you referenced the magical feeling of looking at a very successful painting, because that would be my 2 cents on it, and goes to my personal hobby horse, which is master copies, which is, I would say that would be my answer, because I also am forced sometimes to paint from photographs when there's a commission and the person won't sit for me for as long as I want them to sit for me, and I have ambitions about the painting, and I know where I want it to go, and it can't go there in such a short amount of time. So I'm forced to work from photography, but I supplement heavily by working from art history. If there's something about that figure that I find compelling, I would immediately kind of scroll back in my mind to all the possibilities that I have, all the things that I've seen throughout art history that excite me. And then next to that photograph, if I display it on the screen and I'm working with it, there's always like 3 or 4 paintings larger than the photograph. And I know, okay, so the photograph, what it provides me, you said it provides you the details. What I think it provides me is the shapes, just the shapes. I get the shape of the shirt or the shape of the shadow on the pants or whatever it is, but nothing else. If I have to pick colors, I go to my favorite painters. I go to Ingres, I go to Rembrandt, I go to Jacques-Louis David, I go to Velasquez, I go to my heroes, and I ask them for help. I'm like, Velasquez, I don't want to make it boring like this photograph. Help me out here. Like, how would you mix those colors? And so this is not to suggest to people not to go out there and make thousands of sketches from life. You should. I just also suggest that you should make thousands of master copies, because that also is, at least for me, that has been a lifesaver. Because before I understood that I could really trust and count on my heroes to help me when I need them, working from photography was an absolute tragedy. Like, again and again and again, I would make paintings that just are so unsatisfying. So art history's got your back, people, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I liked what you said too about the photos, because that more accurately expresses how I feel about them. They don't give me details, they give me shapes, they give me drawing. That's what a photo does, because I don't have time in 10 minutes while the light changes to draw that mountain. So I never worry about that. Like, and you'll see in my sketches that when occasionally I'll be like, this is what I'm painting and this is my painting, and there's this mountain that's like this and my mountain's like this. Like every time, because I'm like, listen, I'm not here to draw. Like, I can draw for 10 years from this one photo. There's so much shape, perfect shape. That's what a camera does. It gets shape.
Yeah. Oh, I love that we agree on that, because even this painting that's behind me, this painting in process that's still kind of an underpainting, when I was working with the model, I did a color sketch, and the color sketch looked nothing like her, not even a little bit, because it was really small. And what I was trying to get the color relationships and get an idea about the color. And I told her, like, don't worry, we'll figure out the likeness. Like, this is going to happen. The likeness I can definitely capture from a photograph, but I most certainly cannot get the colors from the photograph. So while I have you here, I'm going to focus on what's absolutely necessary to draw from life, which is the color relationships and everything that has to do with design, with shapes. The photograph is going to provide that in an adequate way. I don't really feel so stressed as I should. If you could look for a minute on the inside of our, you could say, trend, like the contemporary realism trend, or however we choose to define it. Are there things in that stream that you would like to see more of when you look at the people around us? I'm sure it sounds to me like you observe art very critically, as I do. And I have ambitions from my own work, but I also have ambitions with regards to what's going to happen when people write about whatever happens today in art history. Like, what do you think we need to say with our work, or where should we go?
That is a good question. I wish that we had more of a salon, like a contemporary version of the old salon. And I wish that it was more universal. I wish that it was on ABC News at night. Like, I wish that art was more mainstream. Paintings were more mainstream. I think there's so much vying for our attention right now that I don't see it actually happening. But as an artist, I want people, normal people, to care more about paintings. I want them to have the joy that's available and waiting for them in a painting, but that so many are unwilling to receive. And I would even say that so many don't have an opportunity to receive, because you be into art, love art, take art all through high school, you become a dentist or something, and you go to the museums. Well, actually, you have to be kind of, because you can find great art. There are museums with fantastic art, just pure joy all over the world. but we have a large number of state-sponsored or nationally sponsored museums that are full of the confusing and the empty, right? And so even if people are interested in art and they want to have that experience, and they go to the art museum and they go, oh, wow, so this is it. This is what I've got. And then they give up. So I just wish that it was more, I wish that museums were full of I wish that I could curate all our museums.
I love it.
The very finest that have ever been produced. I wish that's what it was at museums, because people would go and they would feel something and they would be addicted to art, and art would be more of a thing that we talk about, and it'd be more of a thing that we experience collectively rather than this tiny niche of artists and collectors that we have currently. So I wish that something like that could happen in our time, but I don't see it happening.
I'll be on the lookout for the call where I can nominate you to curate all of the museums. I'll be very happy to submit my recommendation. That sounds like a great future. I think we can end on asking, what would you say is your artistic dream? Like looking if you were, for example, in your old age, looking back at your career, what is some kind of accomplishment that you really, really want to hit?
So we've kind of hinted at it throughout the conversation we've had, that there have been a couple paintings. One was Franz Schwartz, Agony in Gethsemane. It's a painting of Christ. One was Emil Carlson. It was a seascape that he had in an exhibit with Clyde Aspavig up in Billings, Montana. I'm trying to think of Sargent's hermit painting in the Met, the deer, that little guy. Oh man. There have been a couple paintings, several, that have been transforming to me, right? That have, I think, gone beyond just good painting and gone beyond great painting, and blessed me in a way that only a painting could, changed me in a way that only a painting could, like just been amazing, like a very, very powerful, special experience just to stand in front of that painting, right? So I know that that's something that art can do. I know that it's something it's capable of. And I want so bad to make something someday that does that for someone. Like, that's what I want. That's why I paint.
Amazing.
And it's hard. Like, it's so hard. I'm going to work my whole life to do it. And I hope it happens. Like, I have faith that it will happen. But I think it's going to happen in spite of myself, right? Almost like we talked about earlier, how beauty comes through a mountain and through a cloud and connects with us. It's not necessarily that the cloud is beauty. It's a thing that comes through, and it's a thing that we respond to, and then that thing happens that we call beauty. I think it's similar with me, is that I've got to get to a place where beauty can come through me to someone else. And getting there is the journey. Like, I'm working my tail off, but that in and of itself is not sufficient. Like, there's a lot more that plays into making that happen. And most of it has to do with our motives. My belief is that, like, an artist has to be in a place where it's not about him getting famous. It's not about him making $1 billion on his formaldehyde cow. And it's not about getting acquired by the museum. It's not about any of that. It's like a pure, selfless desire based entirely in love of his fellow man, to make something that's really, really going to bless them, right? Like, somehow I've got to get to that place. So my skills have got to get to a level. I've got to learn get tons of knowledge from my experience with nature. And then I've got to get myself in the right place to where that can happen. But that's what I want desperately as an artist. That's why I paint every day.
That is emotional and inspiring. I'm almost tearing up. Josh, this was amazing. Could you let us know where people can find you, find more about your work?
Yeah, just joshclare.com or at jclareart is my Instagram tag.
Brilliant. Josh, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. You're a fun guy to talk to.
Thank you for joining me. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to see it grow, please take a moment to subscribe, rate it highly, and share it with a friend. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show and have access to exclusive content, please consider signing up as a patron at patreon.com/Ken Goshen. For online lessons, please visit kengoshen.com/lessons. Thanks again, and see you next time.